I can't look at the news anymore these days. Just makes me think of what happened right before. The people I wanted to save, the people I don't even remember anymore. Tonight, though, isn't about grief. There's been too much of that lately, and maybe I can find some peace in the Lord's home tonight. I'm looking forward to one of the pastor's sermons this evening, it being a Wednesday, after all. I admire Mr. Lewis. He always seems to have the right words for me. I file into the church just in time to find a seat among the pews next to my brothers and sisters. Pastor Lewis begins to speak. He speaks from Matthew chapter 18, speaking of the challenges we will face and the sacrifices we'll have to make in the fighting against sin. Then he moves on to Luke 14 and reminds us of our place at the table before finally closing with John 14. A reminder that we all must hold hope in our hearts, for Christ is with us and he always will be. Now I would have loved to linger, but the night was still young and idle hands are the devil's playthings. Climbing into my truck, I decided to pay Richard McAllister a phone call, reading the number off of a business card he gave me for a Justice on Demand, an investigative agency. He picked up promptly, and I had to inquire about what has become of his investigation into Miss Day, which he had done at my behest. Richard, unfortunately, isn't known for being particularly elucidative. From what I gathered from our conversation, which was brief to say the least, there didn't seem to be too much of interest about Miss Day, or at least none that he was able to find. Still, I suspect it's good to keep an eye on her in case she decides to investigate the evening affairs of the Camarilla for her newspaper any further. Next, I needed to pay a visit to Thomas. My sire had told me to meet him in a public park, and I did my best to catch him up on everything that had happened. Well, he seemed to be troubled, kind of distracted. Of course, I just asked him about it, keeping things simple. Well, he just said he had a meeting with Houston's Guard, that being the coterie of our sires, meaning he was meeting with David Reno and William Cobb. On the topic, I asked him about the fourth member of the coterie, who had gone missing. Thomas didn't want to say too much about him, but he was clearly upset about whatever happened. I got the feeling he didn't want to say anything more, so I just didn't push it. Changing the subject, I asked about maybe going to a gangrel meeting. You see, I reckon their disciplines might be of use to me, and yet I'd yet to meet one in Houston. They weren't the biggest clan in Houston, sure, but I still found it strange. He made mention of the fact that they have some more unstructured meetups, and he'd have to bring me to one sometime. Well, it seemed that he was keen to get going and make his meeting, so I bid him farewell and good morning, and I went on my way. The next stop on my busy night was to a fellow toreador, going by the name Hudson Day. He took special pride in his art of woodworking, and I was damn near chomping at the bit to get some of his work firsthand. Some stakes, I'm sure, could be mighty useful against the Sabbat. But what I'm really after is a rocking chair for my front porch. You see, Stillwater Ranch could use a bit more furnishing, and Houston's finest is just what I think it needs. A wooden sign marks the entrance of his business, and there's a rose etched into its surface. There's a younger lad working the counter, but I'd reckon he's fresh out of high school. but it's hard to say. Mr. Day promised me my rocking chair, and I left him my number to reach out. He didn't seem very interested in calling me, but he figured he'd have someone let me know when the time came. After all that, I returned home to Stillwater Ranch for just a few minutes. I needed to change clothes into something a little less fancy, because I had just one more stop for the evening, and it was to a certain Malkavian. His name was Herman, and he's the owner of a nightclub known as the Haze. The place is damn dreadful, with flashing colors and sin around every corner. Pretty sure it's the feeding ground in Negan, actually. But that's not what's important. You see, Herman is someone who knows information, and he'll trade it to you, as long as you have some to pay in turn. Of course, you could always offer him a boon instead. That's what I had to do tonight. Pay up. The tricky thing is that I was looking for a little bit extra in turn for the gold mine of information I was about to give him. When I had reached the office of the Haze, my headache was lessened, but still present. The heavy bass of the club was still pounding through the walls. Herman was wearing more colors than an oil spill, but that wasn't unusual for him by any means. I wasn't here to talk about the Sabbat. I wasn't allowed to, even if I wanted to. But there was a new thin blood in town, and I told Herman just about every single thing I knew about Jack Walter. And I brought up that Sheriff Reno wasn't planning on killing him, despite his lack of a sire. Now, Herman didn't seem much bothered by Reno not enforcing the traditions, which surprised me. He asked me what I wanted to know, and I asked about William Cobb, Richard's Nosferatu's sire. And he told me that Mr. Cobb had held on to the right to sire Richard for just over 10 years, and that the Seneschal owed Mr. Cobb a boon, and a right big one at that. Now, who's to say what this all means? But there sure is an awful lot of puzzle pieces getting laid out before me. On the bright side, I don't reckon Jack will get into too much trouble as a result of me, seeing how he's under the protection of Reno for the moment. But I guess we'll just have to see. There's still plenty left to chew on after all.